David never understood why people constantly asked him for advice. At 42 years old, he wasn't famous. He wasn't rich. He wasn't particularly handsome either. Yet wherever he went, people seemed drawn to him. Especially women. The strange part was that when he was younger, things had been completely different. At 22, David spent most of his time trying to impress people. He worried about his appearance. He worried about saying the right things. He worried about whether people liked him. And somehow, despite all his effort, he often felt invisible. Now, 20 years later, he had stopped trying so hard. And that was exactly when everything changed. It was a quiet Friday evening when he met Emma. David sat alone in a small bookstore cafe, reading a novel while drinking coffee. The place was peaceful. Warm lights reflected off wooden shelves filled with books. Soft music played in the background. David enjoyed places like this. He had learned to appreciate silence. Years ago, he would have considered such an evening boring. Now it felt perfect. As he turned another page, he noticed someone approaching his table. A young woman stood there holding a coffee cup. She looked nervous. "Excuse me," she said. David smiled. "Yes. Do you mind if I sit here? Every other table is taken." He looked around. There were plenty of empty tables. But he didn't point that out. Instead, he smiled. "Of course." She sat down. For several minutes neither spoke. Emma occasionally glanced toward him. David continued reading. Finally, curiosity got the better of her. "What are you reading?" David showed her the cover. She smiled. "I've heard that's a good book." "It is. Do you come here often?" "Sometimes." Unlike many men she had met, David never seemed desperate to keep the conversation going. He wasn't trying to impress her. He wasn't trying to flirt. He wasn't trying to prove anything. And strangely, that made him more interesting. Over the next hour they talked casually. Books, travel, life, dreams. The conversation flowed naturally. When Emma finally left, she found herself thinking about him. She couldn't explain why. He wasn't the youngest man she had ever met. He wasn't the most stylish. Yet there was something about him. Something different. A week later they met again. Then again. And again. Eventually friendship formed between them. Emma was 30 years old. Intelligent. Successful. Beautiful. She could have dated countless men her own age. Yet she found herself increasingly drawn toward David. One evening they sat beside a river watching the sunset. Emma finally asked the question that had been on her mind for weeks. "Can I ask you something?" David smiled. "Sure. Why are you so calm all the time?" He laughed. "I'm not. You seem like it." David looked toward the water. For a moment he didn't answer. Then he said something that surprised her. "Because life taught me that worrying changes very little." Emma listened carefully. David continued. "When I was younger, I thought confidence meant having all the answers. And now I know confidence means being okay without them." The answer stayed with Emma long after that evening ended. Over the following months she noticed more things. David never competed for attention. He never bragged. He never exaggerated his achievements. He listened more than he spoke. And when he spoke, people listened. Not because he demanded respect, but because he naturally earned it. One day Emma attended a business conference. Several younger men spent the event trying to impress everyone around them. They talked constantly about success, money, cars, status. David attended the same event, yet he barely mentioned himself. Instead, he asked questions, showed interest, made people feel important. By the end of the evening, everyone seemed gathered around him. Emma found the contrast fascinating. Later she asked him why. David smiled. "When you're young, you often try to prove your value. And when you're older, you realize your value doesn't need constant proof." The answer struck her deeply. Months passed. Their friendship became stronger. Emma began noticing something else. She felt safe around him. Completely safe. Not because he protected her physically, but because he created emotional security. If she shared a fear, he listened. If she made a mistake, he didn't judge. If she failed, he didn't mock her. He simply understood. Many people underestimate how attractive understanding can be. Emma certainly had. Until now. One rainy evening they sat in a restaurant overlooking the city. Lights glowed beneath dark clouds. People hurried through the streets below. Emma watched David quietly. Can I tell you something strange? Of course. I think I understand why women like older men. David laughed. You make it sound like we're a different species. She smiled. Maybe you are. What do you mean? Emma thought carefully before answering. It's not really about age. David raised an eyebrow. No, it's about what age teaches. He remained silent, listening. Emma continued. You know who you are. You don't chase approval. You don't panic when things go wrong. You don't play games. You don't pretend. David looked away thoughtfully. For a moment he remembered his younger self. The insecurity, the fear, the constant need for validation. She was right. Age hadn't made him attractive. Experience had. Life had. Pain had. Failure had. Growth had. Years later, Emma would learn even more about David's past. The failed business that nearly destroyed him. The heartbreak that left him devastated. The mistakes he regretted. The nights he cried alone. The fears he never showed anyone. Everything he had survived helped shape the man he became. Many people only saw confidence. They didn't see the struggles that created it. One afternoon Emma found an old photograph of David from his 20s. She laughed. What? You look completely different. I was. She studied the image. The young man in the photograph seemed tense. Uncertain. Almost anxious. Nothing like the man sitting beside her. What changed? David smiled softly. Life. The answer sounded simple, but it contained decades of lessons. Lessons about loss. Lessons about love. Lessons about patience. Lessons about resilience. And perhaps that was the real reason mature men often seemed attractive. Not because of gray hair. Not because of age itself. But because experience leaves marks that cannot be faked. A person who has survived difficult times often develops a different kind of strength. A quieter strength. One that doesn't need attention. One that doesn't need applause. One that simply exists. Emma found herself admiring that strength more than anything else. Months eventually turned into years. Friendship slowly transformed into something deeper. Neither planned for it, neither expected it, yet it happened naturally. One evening they returned to the same bookstore cafe where they first met. The same shelves, the same tables, the same warm lights. Emma smiled. Do you remember the first day we met? David laughed. The day you pretended every table was occupied. She laughed too. I had to think of something. Why? Emma looked directly into his eyes. Because I wanted an excuse to talk to you. David shook his head. You could have just said hello. No. Why not? She smiled. Because I was nervous. Nervous. Emma nodded. You seemed confident. David laughed loudly. For the record, I was nervous too. For a moment they simply smiled at each other. Then Emma became serious. You know something. What? The most attractive thing about you was never your age. David listened quietly. It was your peace. The words hung in the air. She continued. You spent years becoming comfortable with yourself. Most people never do. David looked down. He knew she was right. The greatest gift maturity had given him wasn't wisdom. It wasn't confidence. It wasn't experience. It was peace. The peace that comes from accepting yourself. The peace that comes from surviving hardship. The peace that comes from realizing you don't need to be perfect to be worthy of love. And perhaps that is why truly mature men often appear attractive. Because beneath the confidence lies something far more powerful. A man who no longer needs to prove himself. A man who knows who he is. A man who understands that strength isn't about dominance. It's about stability. It's about kindness. It's about being someone others can trust. As they left the cafe that night, Emma slipped her hand into David's. The city lights shimmered around them. People passed by without noticing. But neither of them cared. Because sometimes attraction has very little to do with appearance. Sometimes it comes from character. From wisdom. From emotional security. From the quiet confidence that only experience can create. And as they walked into the night together, Emma realized something she wished she had understood years earlier. The most attractive people are rarely the ones trying hardest to be noticed. They're often the ones who have learned how to be comfortable with themselves. And that kind of confidence never goes out of style.